My husband had late meetings every night. I put an AirTag in his car. It led me to a beach house, where I found him cooking dinner for another woman and her kids. She looked at me and asked, "Who is she?" My husband stammered, "It's not what you think." I held up our wedding photo and said, "Let's ask your kids if they recognize me." What happened next left him in tears. I never thought I'd be the type of person to do something like this. I never thought I'd be tracking my own husband like some paranoid detective. But I did. And I was right. Let me start from the beginning. Mark, 42 male, and I, 38 female, have been married for 12 years. We live in Jacksonville, Florida, in a nice neighborhood where people smile at you but don't actually know you. Our life was normal. Boring, even. At least, that's what I thought. About 6 months ago, things started to change. Mark has always been predictable. Same morning routine. Same lunch order from the same sandwich place. Same route home. But suddenly, things weren't the same anymore. He started working late more often. At first, it was once or twice a week. Then it was every night. He'd walk in at 11 p.m., sometimes later, smelling like he just showered. Then came the secrecy. His phone was always face down. He started keeping it on silent. He took calls outside. If I walked into a room, he'd shove it in his pocket like a guilty teenager. The excuses started piling up. Work was demanding. His boss was pushing him hard. A big project was taking all his time. I asked why he never worked from home like he used to. He sighed and said, "Confidential stuff. Can't risk it." I should have left it alone. But something in my gut told me he was lying. I started watching him more closely. One night, I noticed something strange. He got home around midnight, exhausted, barely speaking. But his shirt had no wrinkles. His breath had no trace of coffee or fast food, even though he said he had dinner at the office. The final straw? The intimacy stopped. Completely. For 12 years, he had never once turned me down. And now? Too tired. Too stressed. Not in the mood. Not anywhere near his office. It was heading out of town. I sat on the couch, staring at the map, watching his car move further and further away from Jacksonville. Then it stopped. At a beach house. My chest tightened. I don't remember getting in my car. I don't remember the drive. All I remember is my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. 45 minutes later, I was parked outside a house straight out of a travel magazine. It was beautiful. White with a big porch, string lights glowing in the dark. Music floated through the open windows. Laughter. I got out. My legs were shaking. My hands felt numb. I walked up the porch steps. Through the window, I saw him. Mark. Standing in the kitchen. Cooking. For a woman. And 2 kids. He was wearing the apron I bought him last Christmas. He was flipping something in a pan, laughing at something the woman said. She was barefoot, wearing leggings and an oversized sweater. She leaned on the counter like she belonged there. Like she had done this 100 times before. The kids were sitting at the dining table, swinging their legs, waiting for dinner. It looked like a family. His family. Something inside me snapped. I walked up to the door. It wasn't locked. I pushed it open. The warm smell of garlic and butter filled the air. Music was still playing. The kids were talking. The woman was smiling. Then she saw me. Her smile disappeared. The kids stopped talking. Mark turned around. The color drained from his face. He dropped the spatula. The room was dead silent. The woman looked at me, then at Mark. Then she asked, "Who is she?" Mark opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His hands were shaking. His lips parted again. It's not what you think," he stammered. I didn't look at him. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and opened a picture from our wedding day. I turned to the kids. I held up the screen. "Let's ask your kids if they recognize me." Silence. The woman's face twisted in confusion. She looked at Mark again, waiting for an answer. Mark blinked rapidly. His hands were on his head now. He looked like he was about to be sick. One of the kids, a little girl, maybe 6 or 7, looked at me. Then she turned to Mark. And then, "Daddy?" The second that little girl said, "Daddy," my stomach dropped. Mark flinched like the word had physically hit him. The woman whipped her head toward him, her expression shifting from confusion to full-blown panic. "What did she just say?" she asked, her voice sharp, cracking at the edges. Mark didn't answer. His hands were still on his head like he was trying to hold his brain together. I took a step forward, shoving my phone closer. "Recognize me now?" My voice was shaking, but I didn't care. The woman's eyes flicked to the screen. The wedding photo. Me, in a white dress, Mark kissing my forehead. Our wedding. She paled. The kids just sat there, eyes bouncing between me and Mark like they were watching a movie they didn't understand. I looked at the woman. "You didn't know?" It wasn't a question. Her mouth opened. Then closed. Her hand tightened around the edge of the counter. Mark finally moved. "Listen, just let me explain," he croaked. His voice was weak. Nothing like the smooth, confident man I married. I let out a sharp laugh. "Explain? Explain what? That you've been playing house with another woman? That you have kids I didn't know about?" I pointed at the little girl. "Your daughter just called you daddy." The woman staggered back like she'd been slapped. "Mark," she whispered. "What is she talking about?" He turned to her, eyes wild. "Britt, just give me a second, okay?" Britt. The name hit me like a truck. I knew that name. 2 months ago, Mark got a phone call in the middle of the night. He let it go to voicemail, but I saw the name flash on the screen. Brittany. I asked him who she was. He barely looked up. "Work thing," he said. "Go back to sleep." Now she was standing right in front of me. And judging by the way her hands were trembling, she wasn't just some work thing. "You told me you were divorced," Brittany whispered, her voice barely there. "Divorced." I laughed again, but this time it felt more like a sob. "Divorced? Divorced?" I turned to Mark. "You told her you were divorced?" His jaw clenched. He looked at the floor. The silence stretched. Then Brittany turned on him. Are you serious?" Her voice rose, shaking with rage. "You told me you were divorced?" He flinched. I was going to tell you, I swear." "When, Mark?" She gestured wildly at me. "When your wife walked through the goddamn door?" The kids jumped at the sound of her voice. The younger one, a toddler, maybe 2, started to whimper. Brittany saw it. She closed her eyes, sucking in a sharp breath, pressing a hand to her forehead. I was still stuck on divorced. "You told her we were divorced," I said again, slower this time, letting the words roll out like poison. "While we were still married. While I was waiting at home for you every night." Mark ran a hand down his face. "I didn't, it's not that simple." I barked out a bitter laugh. "It is exactly that simple." Brittany turned back to me. "You live with him?" she asked, like she was trying to piece the puzzle together in real time. "Yes," I snapped. "I'm his wife." She stumbled backward. Her breathing was ragged, her hands shaking so badly she had to grip the counter. The reality was crashing down on her, too. I should have felt bad for her. She wasn't the enemy here. But I couldn't focus on her feelings. Not when my entire marriage had just collapsed in the middle of her perfect beach house. I took another step toward Mark, closing the space between us. I wanted to see the lies on his face up close. "You've been living 2 lives," I said, voice low, steady. 2 goddamn lives. Mark swallowed hard. How long?" I cut him off. He hesitated. "How long, Mark?" The toddler started crying. I didn't care. Mark finally whispered, 3 years. Brittany let out a choked gasp. My heart stopped. 3 years. My vision blurred. My ears started ringing. I took a step back, gripping the edge of a chair to stay upright. 3 years. He had been lying to me for 3 years. I thought about everything we had done in that time. Our vacations. Our anniversaries. The nights I spent waiting up for him, believing he was working. All while he was here. Playing husband to another woman. Being daddy to her kids. The walls of the house suddenly felt too small. The air too thick. Mark took a step toward me. I shot my hand up. "Don't." My voice was sharp, slicing through the room like a knife. He froze. I turned back to Brittany. "You've been with him for 3 years?" She nodded slowly, her face a mix of rage and devastation. "Did you know about me?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. I already knew the answer. I nodded, my mind racing. Do your kids call him dad? Brittany looked like she wanted to be anywhere but here. Not the little one, she admitted, voice barely a whisper. But Lily. I turned to the older girl. Lily. The kid who just called him daddy. She thinks he's her father? I asked. Brittany swallowed hard. He is her father. The room spun. I stumbled back, hitting the wall. Brittany kept talking, but I barely heard her. Mark told me, he said he was going through a rough divorce, that he wasn't ready to introduce Lily to his ex-wife yet. Ex-wife. The word felt like nails on my skin. My stomach clenched so hard I thought I might throw up. Mark wasn't just cheating. He had a whole child with another woman. A child he hid from me. A child who was older than his so-called late nights at work. Which meant. Oh my God. He had been cheating long before those late meetings even started. Mark wasn't just a liar. He was a monster. And now, standing in the middle of his second life, I realized something. I didn't know the man in front of me at all. I was standing in a stranger's house, staring at a man I had shared my life with for over a decade, and I realized something that made my blood run cold. This wasn't just cheating. This wasn't just lying. This was something so much worse. My breathing was ragged. The edges of my vision were dark. I felt like the floor was tilting under me. 3 years. A whole child. A second life. And somehow, my mind still couldn't process the full weight of what Mark had done. Brittany was crying now, silent tears slipping down her face as she clutched the edge of the counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The toddler was still whimpering. Lily, the child who just called my husband daddy, was staring at me with big, confused eyes, like she was waiting for someone to tell her this was all a mistake. I turned back to Mark, my hands shaking with pure, unfiltered rage. How? My voice came out hoarse. I swallowed hard and tried again. How the hell did you manage this? 2 lives. 2 families. Did you ever stop and think about what would happen when this all came crashing down? Mark ran a hand over his face. I didn't mean for this to happen. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh. You didn't mean for this to happen? What exactly didn't you mean to do, Mark? Lie for years? Get another woman pregnant? Make a second family? His silence was the only answer I needed. I shook my head, my chest heaving. You're disgusting. I turned to leave. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get out. Then Brittany said something that made me freeze. He married me. The words punched the air out of my lungs. I whipped around so fast my vision blurred. What did you just say? My voice was eerily calm. Brittany's hands were shaking violently now. She grabbed her phone from the counter, tapped the screen a few times, and then turned it toward me. There, on the screen, was a wedding photo. Mark. In a tuxedo. Standing next to her. A beachside ceremony. Small. Intimate. Her in a simple white dress, him holding her waist like he meant it. My stomach twisted violently. My knees nearly buckled. This wasn't just cheating. This wasn't even a double life. This was bigamy. Mark wasn't just my cheating husband. He was her husband, too. Legally. The rage inside me turned into something else. Something sharp. Dangerous. I met his eyes. You actually married her? Mark's face had gone completely white. He didn't answer. I took a slow step toward him. Answer me. His throat bobbed. He looked at Brittany. Then back at me. Then he whispered, yes. The room went dead silent. I clenched my fists, fighting the overwhelming urge to lunge at him and claw his face off. Instead, I turned to Brittany. How long ago? She swallowed hard. 2 years. I sucked in a sharp breath. He had married her 2 years ago. While still being married to me. While coming home to my bed. While looking me in the eyes and telling me I was his one and only. I staggered back, gripping the wall. Mark held out a hand like he could fix this. It's not like that. You don't understand, I snapped my head up, glaring at him with every ounce of hatred I had. Oh, I understand perfectly. My voice was shaking, but my words were sharp as a knife. Then I looked at Brittany. And I saw something in her expression that I hadn't noticed before. She wasn't just devastated. She was terrified. And suddenly, the pieces shifted. She wasn't just finding out about me. She wasn't just finding out that her husband was already married. She was afraid. Of him. My stomach twisted. I looked back at Mark. He was rubbing his temples, avoiding both of our eyes. His whole body was tense. Like he was waiting for something. For one horrifying second, I realized, if Brittany hadn't seen our wedding photo, would he have kept lying? Would he have kept both of us trapped in this twisted, sick game? And then, an even darker thought hit me. If he had lied about everything else, what else was he capable of? I turned back to Brittany, stepping closer. Brittany. My voice was low. Urgent. Has he ever hurt you? Her breath hitched. She didn't answer. But the look in her eyes said everything. My pulse spiked. Has he ever hurt the kids? Her jaw clenched. Not physically. I felt sick. Emotionally. Psychologically. Of course. Of course he had. Mark wasn't just a liar. He was a manipulator. And Brittany had been trapped in this nightmare just as much as I had. She glanced at him, just for a second. Just long enough for me to see it. Fear. She was scared to say more. Mark finally looked up, his face a mask of something dark. You need to stop. My skin crawled. I turned back to Brittany. Do you want to leave? Her lip trembled. She didn't answer. But she didn't have to. I nodded slowly. Then I grabbed my phone and hit record. Mark's eyes widened. What the hell are you doing? I turned the camera toward him. I'm making sure you never get to lie again. The second my phone started recording, Mark's entire demeanor changed. His panic turned to rage. His face twisted, and his voice dropped into something low and threatening. Turn that off. I didn't move. Brittany was frozen, her eyes darting between me and Mark like she couldn't believe what was happening. The kids sat silent, too young to understand, but they could feel the tension in the air. Mark took a step forward, jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. I said turn it off, now. I tightened my grip on my phone. Or what, Mark? His nostrils flared. His hands curled into fists at his sides. For the first time in 12 years, I felt actual fear in his presence. And that's when I knew. I had never really known him. The man I loved, the man I trusted, was never real. Just a mask. And now, that mask was slipping. How long do you think you can hide this? I spat. Bigamy is illegal, Mark. You've committed fraud. Lied to 2 families. Lied to your own child. Mark snapped. His hand shot out toward my phone. But I was faster. I yanked it away, stepping backward. You lay a single hand on me, and I swear to God, Brittany gasped. Mark, stop. He froze mid-step, his breathing heavy, nostrils flaring. Then, just as suddenly as the rage appeared, it vanished. His expression shifted. His shoulders dropped. And suddenly, he looked exhausted. Defeated. Like he had lost before the fight even started. I saw it in his eyes. He knew this was the end. For the first time since stepping into this house, I had the power. And I was about to use it. I turned to Brittany, lowering my voice. Do you have family? Someone who can come get you and the kids? She blinked rapidly, processing the words. Then she nodded. My sister. She lives in Tampa. Good, I said. Call her. Pack your things. You don't need to stay here. Mark let out a bitter laugh. You think you can just come in here and destroy my life? I snapped my head toward him. Your life? Your life? I let out a short, bitter laugh. You destroyed your own life, Mark. And ours along with it. His face twisted. I was trying to do the right thing. I almost lost it right then and there. The right thing? My voice cracked. You married me. Then you married her. You had a whole child. You lied. You built 2 lives. How the hell is that the right thing? Mark's face turned red. I was trying to keep everyone happy. No. I screamed. You were trying to keep yourself happy. And now it's all blowing up in your face. The kids flinched at my yelling. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about us, the people he left behind in his wreckage. Brittany looked at me, voice trembling. What are you going to do? I glanced at my phone, still recording. Then I smiled. For the first time since this nightmare started, I smiled. I left the house that night with a plan. And I executed it flawlessly. The next morning, I went straight to an attorney. I showed him the video. I laid out everything: Mark's fake divorce story, his second marriage, his second family. I watched my lawyer's eyebrows shoot up so high they nearly disappeared into his hairline. "You have enough evidence to bury him," he said simply. I nodded. "Good." We started the paperwork that day. Not just for divorce. For fraud charges. For bigamy. For child support, because if Mark thought he could abandon Lily now, he was in for a rude awakening. And then, I did the thing that made Mark really lose his mind. I posted the video. On Facebook. On Instagram. On a private Reddit thread. I blurred out the kids, but everything else? Public. Mark's lies. Mark's cheating. Mark's other life. People ate it up. Friends. Family. Coworkers. Everyone he knew saw it. And guess what? Brittany wasn't the only other woman. More women started reaching out. One from Miami. One from Atlanta. One even younger. Mark had more women. More lies. More lives. He was a serial liar. A predator. And now? The whole world saw him for what he was. Mark tried to call. He left voicemails, texts, desperate emails. "You didn't have to ruin me. You'll regret this. I was just trying to love you both." I ignored them all. The last thing I ever said to him was through my lawyer: "You don't exist to me anymore." Brittany left. She packed up the kids and moved in with her sister. She and I still talk sometimes. We aren't friends, but we're something. Survivors, maybe. It's been a year now. I'm free. I have my own place. I have peace. I don't cry over Mark. I don't wonder where he is. Because the truth is, the man I married never existed. He was just a mask. A lie. But I exist. And I will never let someone like him fool me again.